I'll just hit record. Alrighty, welcome everybody to the digital launch here tonight. I'll start off with a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. A few more people will be popping in because we can't all be together this evening. Of course, it would be superb if you could leave your cameras on. We want to see your beautiful faces. Doesn't go the same way for the microphones because we don't want to.
Oh, got it. Hi, Steph.
Everyone quickly clearing up the backs of their. Hi, Joe.
That's all you're going to see, Michael.
Okay.
Hi, Mira. We're here. So everybody's good to see everybody's faces. There will be time for questions at the end, and I'm hoping that we can switch microphones on and ask questions. Try and leave some time for that. But yeah, please have your cameras on so we can celebrate all together. I'll briefly begin with acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm presenting this launch tonight, which is the home of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Welcome everyone. It's so good to be here with Steph tonight. The first launch of the freedom of birds from Australian soil, or the East Island as New Zealanders call it. My name is Rob Verhagen, and it's a great pleasure to be here on behalf of Elfin Bookshop, celebrating Steph's latest novel. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to Gabby from Left Bank Literary, who's here tonight. And has Annette been able to stop by, Steph?
She said she was driving. She's on her way home and driving, so she might pop in later if she makes it home, I guess.
Negligent to Zoom and drive.
Yeah.
Of course, we congratulate Alan and Unwin on this publication as well. I'm sure that I don't need to tell most of you who will be fans of Stephanie's work, but I will anyway, that Steph is an author whose historical fiction has captured the hearts of many. Her first novel, Into the World, was published to wide acclaim in 2017 and longlisted for the Tasmania Book Prize of the Tasmanian Premier's Literary Awards. Kicked off a trilogy of connected tales with her best-selling novel, Josephine's Garden, for its second instalment, and now we have The Freedom of Birds to bring it home in its final act. Will you all please put your digital hands together and welcome Steph Parkyn.
Yeah.
It's so much better, isn't it, to have real clapping rather than just digital clapping. Now, Steph, I've read the book. I've loved the book, but I'm hoping for those in the Zoom tonight who haven't yet got their hands on a copy, are you able to kick things off for us by introducing the story that began in your heart and then ended up in these pages? What is The Freedom of Birds about?
Yes, well, very simply, it's about two French storytellers who meet up with a runaway girl, and they form a performing troupe, and they travel through the lands of Napoleon's empire as the empire is crumbling around them at that 1812 time, the end of the empire. It's definitely kind of bringing that, because for those who've read Into the World, you start with the revolution, which is in a way, the end of an old and beginning of a new. Yes, that's right. And it sort of started that whole change of social way of being, really, that French Revolution. And it also, propelled this Napoleon to power, and then it ended with him losing his power. So that's interesting, the way the country was trying to find its first steps of democracy.
Now, tell us about this place. You've spent a lot of time researching it. When we think of Europe, it's obviously very different. Can you describe what Napoleonic Europe was like when we enter on stage with Remy Victoire?
Yes, it's so different to the map that you would think of today. So the lands that I've thrown my characters into the middle of is the fairy tale region of modern day Germany. But it wasn't called Germany back then. It was just all of these feudal lords, really, and they would have paid their tithes to the Holy Roman Empire. But Napoleon comes along and changes all that, and really then all these little group landgraves, kings of their sort of local area, now follow whatever Napoleon says. And they form this thing called the Confederation of the Rhine So that was all very different and new to me. And there's also Prussia, which no longer exists now as it is. And even parts of Italy were separate kingdoms, and the Republic of Venice was something separate. It wasn't unified. So it was very difficult to talk about or write about and not make it sound like a massive geography lesson at the same time.
Yeah, it's a bit of a lesson on showing, not telling, and sometimes leaving those things to the reader to figure out, isn't it?
Yes, hopefully you just throw a few names in here and there, and people will work out what area you're talking about. Yeah.
And by now there are some, but not a lot of. It's a very new landscape compared to the previous two novels. People who've read Into the World and Josephine's Garden will be picking up some familiar territory. But how difficult was it for you to reimagine that landscape?
Yeah, it was well, not too bad really, because it was really fun that they were all fictional characters this time as well. So in the past two novels, I was really, everyone was real. So I have that pressure of getting it right, and getting what happened to those people in their right places, and puzzling the story around that, I guess. Whereas with The Freedom of Birds, I had so much more freedom to kind of come up with my story, and then the sort of big events of history were playing in the background, and they fortuitously fell into place with what I wanted the story to be doing for my characters as well, forming that conflict of this crumbling empire as they're trying to travel around through it. So yeah, that worked out really well for me.
That's the one piece of advice that I've often heard about great historical fiction writing. It's kind of like Gone with the Wind. It has the Civil War in the background and the love interest at the front. So the big events going on in the background. And for you, Napoleon is in the shadows. And we've got Remy, Pascal, and Saskia in the front. Did you come up with these wonderful characters first, or for you was it the events of world history that gave you a bit of a catalyst to get into the story?
It was all about Remy for me for the start, because he is the child of my first heroine in the first book. So he was a foundling and a part of an orphan theatre group, a group that has taken in orphans in Paris. So it started with him because I wanted to know what would happen to children that had been given away at that time to the church or abandoned in some way, and those themes of abandonment are all in fairy tales as well. When you think of Hansel and Gretel being abandoned in the forest, and so there were all these things that started to play in together, and they just go ping ping, and you think, oh, that's good, I can use that, put that in. So he really started it, but Saskia came along, and hers is a very fairy tale story, and she is actually dealing with a devil, an ogre of sorts as well to deal with through the story. So, and she's also a bit of a inspired by Little Red Riding Hood for me too, because that area, some of those original stories came from France, and the French storytellers brought them into this area of Germany where the story was set. So I was kind of finding these things out as I went and feeding them into the story.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, when you say Little Red Riding Hood, that rings a lot of bells. And I was wondering what else would have inspired Saskia in your reading. What about perhaps that traveling circus? Can you share a little bit about your discovery of the traveling circus?
Yeah, so I took a bit of inspiration from the circuses that were starting at that time, and they were generally, they were like horse riding circuses, as in circles, and trick riders and so forth were performing in them, and they weren't traveling so much, but they were set up in places like outside of St. Petersburg, because Catherine the Great was really really fell in love with the idea of these circuses. So I came up with the idea that there might have been a St. Petersburg traveling circus to kickstart that sort of era. And it comes from a long tradition of those kinds of things through Russia as well, with some of them would have been with animals or performers of artists and stuff. And my character Saskia, I've made her a contortionist. So she has got some agency of her own. She's learnt the skill and is quite proud of it. And it gives her this ability to go around and perform with the storytellers. But she's stolen away from her family that she loves in the circus. And yeah, so that's when she escapes from that and our protagonists all get together.
Mm. And the three of them, although they're a bit of an unlikely coalition, they start by running away, but they're not the only, I guess, orphans of the story. Although it seems that Saskia and Pascal and Remy are looking for a place, is place the only force in Freedom of Birds that is informing people's identities, or are there other forces that are forging these characters, making them who they are?
Yeah, I think you're right, because you know, the ideas of nations and where you were wouldn't have been the same as we have now. And you know, Saskia, for instance, doesn't know where she's from, so she's trying to go back to a place, but she's working on memories of a grandmother. And she, you know, she's been told about the woods or the beach, but no names of where she is. So when she's away from that, she can't find it. Yeah, and some of the other characters, you know, some of them are looking for independence and freedom, and some are looking for stability. So those things are at play through the novel, I think. Yeah. Without spoiling what happens, there's a conflict between fairy tales that are written down and fairy tales that are performed. It features pretty prominently in the book. One thing that is pretty common right now is the retelling or the flipping of fairy tales. You know, a lot of recent books have done this, but it's not necessarily a new thing, is it? No, that's right. The stories have changed and moved over time. And yeah, and I think whenever we have stories with morals like that, there's a temptation to want to re-examine those social influences and say, is that moral relevant now? And yeah, just going back to Little Red Riding Hood, for instance. So that was a story written in France in the 1690s for the Sun King, performed, and it was really a moral for young ladies at that time: beware of sly and charming men. And by the time 100 years later, it's traveled to the Grimm's region of Germany, and it's become a tale for children to behave and, you know, trust their parents when they tell them not to go into the woods. So those things have changed, and our storytellers are absolutely incensed when they come across the Brothers Grimm and think that those stories are going to be trapped inside a book and stolen from them. And we do think of that. We think of them as Grimm's tales now, but they weren't. They were collected at that time. And it was part of that growing nationalism that was, you know, they were sick of being oppressed by Napoleon. And I think your own culture comes through, and you want to protect those things when you're being forced to lose that sort of thing. Yeah, so I could see both sides of the argument, but for my traveling storytellers, they are going to lose their livelihood if they can't go around and tell their stories, and people could just take them home and read them in a book. You don't think of, yeah, Grimm's, it was once a modern novel. not so much anymore. Yeah, yeah. One thing for anyone who's actually joined the last 5 or 10 minutes, just letting you know, if there's any questions that come up throughout that spark, please put them in the chat. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, but of course you can throw your questions in the chat, and if I can get to them, I will. I was going to ask, with what you're saying before, Steph, what's your feeling then, having released into the world
into the world. Once it's written, do you feel that that story can only be told once, or have you had different experiences with your previous novels once they're in the hands of readers?
Yeah, well, I guess a story can change all the time, really. And yeah, perhaps with the advent of printing and printing books, we've kind of put more of a ownership on the creation of them, as opposed to a group of people getting around the fire and telling a tale, and it's the sort of same tale that's been told by others. So there is a bit more of a sense of ownership on the creation, perhaps. But even in the writing of it, you have so many decisions to make, and they could go many different ways. So, as you know, with just telling a story that in your day, someone else might have seen it from a slightly different perspective and tell a different version of that. So I think it's all valid to have these different versions of historical events, because they all feed something else to the whole story, or the whole truth that you're trying to tell. What's the message that could be told with any story?
And when it comes to the travel across this landscape, you take us to a lot of different places, but Venice is the heart of the central action in this story, and it's the commedia dell'arte that's the chief driver of that. Can you tell us a little bit about that selection? Why Venice?
Yeah, I don't really know. I think it might have been because I stumbled upon finding out in the research that Napoleon had banned Carnevale, and we think of Venice with our masks, and it all seems so part of the tradition and culture of it, and he had banned that when he'd just taken over in the years before our characters turn up there. And other traditions like the theatre of commedia dell'arte he also banned. That was a form of theatre that was improvised. It wasn't scripted, and so it couldn't be controlled. So it's no wonder that he didn't really trust the performance. And it was also about mocking the powerful. So yeah, that wouldn't have been something that he would have let go. But yeah, Venice, I've been there twice, so that, and a lot of people have as well. And obviously it is such a beautiful and unique place too, the look of it and the color and feel. And yeah, I think it was timely for the story, because it was also such a, the Republic of Venice had been a major trading thing on the world stage, and it had just been taken over. The whole end of the Republic really is happening right then. And yeah, it was bound to be a fertile storyland.
Yeah, absolutely. How well did you know the commedia dell'arte before writing?
Not at all. I probably knew Harlequin, which is in French, it's known as Arlequin, and Arlecchino in Italian. So that's the diamond pattern character, the outfit. And I probably had seen some mask caricatures, and I knew about the traveling troops that would go around through Europe, but I didn't understand the art form at all. So yeah, I had to read up on how they would perform it, and that there was these stock characters, and that they improvised and just sort of made things up, and they mocked the greedy tyrants, and the wily servants were sort of clever. And yeah, so it was a form of art for the people, not the rulers. So that was really interesting as well. Yeah, so I learned a lot while I was doing it, and it had been going for like 300 years, huge part of the tradition of the area, and then banned. So that was always going to be controversial.
Yeah. No, it's always in the eyes of the dictator of a city like that and an art like that. We've got a question actually just come in from another accomplished historical fiction author themselves. Lauren asks, Steph, during your research, what were some of the touchstone books or texts, fiction or non-fiction, that formed the foundation of your story? Did you discover any wonderful new books or authors?
No, it's interesting. I probably mainly did little piece because there was so many pieces of research from different things that I was adding in, that there wasn't like a great book that covered the whole era for me. So it was a bit different to my other books. With Into the World, I had the journals of the actual expeditioners to call upon, and some brilliant works on what was happening for women at that time in the French Revolution. And in Josephine's Garden, I had several really good books on their lives as well. But for this one, I didn't really find that that type of book that, you know, could give me a lot of that. So I used a lot more of internet searching and internet resources for this one.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the women. One thing that people who don't pay too much attention to history will think of it is that it's this linear movement, general trend in progress. We're advancing as we go. But there's this moment in the book where one of the great characters, Colombina, I hope I've said her name right.
Yeah, I think so, Colombina. Yeah.
Very good. She lectures Remy on the power that women have over their own lives. Can you tell us who Veronica Franco was, and a little bit about, does history actually always move in a upward progression?
Yeah, so Veronica Franco was a poet and a high-class prostitute of Venice in the 1500s, and she's a bit of a hero for Colombina because there's some written works as well of a woman that has passed down through those years. So she's inspired by that, but she's also very frustrated that, you know, she says that, you know, do we have to wait hundreds of years for this change? So this woman from the 1500s was asking for equality in various ways as well. And she now in the 1800s is raging about that. And, you know, we know that it's taken a long, long time for them to, for us to achieve what we have now, and how we can go ahead and then come back again, you know, like in terms of education or something like that, you know, freedoms can be given and then they can be taken away. So it's always quite a terrifying thing in that regard when you start to look at the history, and at times when women did have more freedoms and then we find they've been taken away again. And even just looking at the vote in France, you know, it was eye-opening to me in Josephine's and Into the World, how the women were looking for the vote, basically, or, you know, starting that I want to be a citizen equal to you. And that was 1790s, and it took them right through to 1945 before they finally got the vote. So things take a long time, and I did want to put some of those women like Veronica Franco, and Olympe de Gouges comes up again in my work in this one, just because I wanted to say, you know, there absolutely were women that were thinking about equality, and they were writing about it, and they were writing about the injustices. This is not just a modern thing. There were women back then that were annoyed as well, but it has taken this length of time to get change.
When the story is set 300 years before now, Colombina's railing about something that was written 300 years before her. So it's kind of a very, very funny.
Yeah.
Wendy's actually just put a great link in the chat for anyone interested in Veronica Franco's writing. Mira's asked a great question, Mira from Eltham Bookshop. Thinking of characters from your previous books who reappear in The Freedom of Birds, did you write one epic novel or have one epic idea and then feel the need to separate it, or did you have did each character enter your life at a particular moment as you were writing those three books?
Yeah, they just strolled along in. So when I realized that the gardener and the botanist from my first novel went on to be involved with Napoleon and Josephine, that gave me, you know, a chance to say, oh, well, what happened to them? And oh, Napoleon and Josephine are actually quite interesting. All right, I'll go and see what happens next. And the same, I sort of woke up one morning and realized that Remy hadn't been given to the church, and that Olymp wouldn't have done that, and that was what sparked me on, well, where could he have ended up? And, you know, went through this idea of perhaps it was the theatre, because she was involved with the theatre. And yeah, it sort of evolved like that very slowly. I didn't have a big overarching scheme to look at those three areas of French history either, but I guess I was sort of thinking it would be good to do Remy as an older man, as I have, as a 21-year-old, because that has also placed us at that end of Napoleonic era. So once I'd sort of gone through that in my mind, that I wasn't going to tell a direct him as a baby all the way up. We're going to start with him as an older man, sort of, well, you know, young man still growing up, still with a lot of growing up to do.
Not to do some kind of Madame Bovary long life story.
Yeah.
Did it take you back, the writing, to any great theatre that you've seen?
Oh yeah, I have woven in a fair bit of Shakespeare and the original Italian stories of Shakespeare, but I did get to go in London and see the Shakespeare's Globe Theatre and go to a performance there. So it's a replica one, obviously, of the original, but it still was pretty fantastic looking on the inside. So it was very memorable for the costumes and the way it felt like you're part of the history, and for the absolutely, you know, really hard benches, but to sit on. But at the time that we went, it was like a heat wave in London as well, and someone actually fainted in the standing area, so that was probably very traditional as well. So I'm glad I wasn't in the standing area.
They pay less, it's fine. Which show did you see?
The Merry Wives of Windsor. Yeah, and I also saw another really good Shakespeare, Midsummer Night's Dream, which was set entirely in the boughs of a tree inside the Christchurch Arts Centre once. So that was another memorable one.
Oh, that's awesome. The those moments you were talking about before, though, I guess the historical figures, but then the uncertainties, you know, you're waking up in the morning thinking, oh, here's a light bulb moment. Those gaps in the history, how do they make you feel? Excited or daunted?
Oh yeah, excited, definitely. Yeah, because they do give you that kind of freedom to run with the story and just see what's going to happen. Yeah, I do like that. Sometimes having some real backdrops or some real known facts about characters can spark something else as well. So that's always good. So rather than a completely blank slate, but having that freedom to not really know everything about that character. You know, Josephine, she hadn't left much in the way of her own written records, and my first heroine hadn't written anything at all. So, and same this time around, they're all invented. So you've got much more freedom to play with who those people might be, and look at how they can tell the story for you, or, you know, look at their foibles.
Yeah, that gives you the power, but then it also transfers that power across to the reader once the book's in their hands, I think. We are down to our last 10 minutes, and I have one more question, but I'm going to also open the floor in a moment to anybody who wants to ask a question. So if you know how to use the hand up function, that would be super handy for me. If you don't, you can just do this and I'll probably see you. So if anyone is thinking of a question, please don't hold back and we can actually ask them in a moment. But the last thing I wanted to know from you, Steph, just quickly, Chateau Orquevaux, I hope I've said that right. What is it, and when were you there?
Yes, I went to this amazing residency in the area outside of Paris called the Champagne-Ardenne region. And I applied for this residency. It was before COVID times, so that was all good. And yeah, it was an amazing chance to stay in an actual chateau. So I was working on parts of Josephine's Garden edits and writing new scenes for this one. And fortuitously, I didn't know it at the time, but that region of France was actually important for the final scenes pretty much of my new novel, The Freedom of Birds, because that was a lot of the battles around Paris were playing out in that area. And I actually went and saw some of those areas, and I was able to drive around in the countryside and look at the villages, and the chateau itself had this beautiful aspect across to a fairy tale church and over a lake and up to woods, and so it was all very good setting for the fairy tale side of it as well, and just brilliant to immerse myself in that sort of French history world, and yeah, just the fortuitousness of, I didn't know at that point that I would be including that part, the battles, and then to realize that that was the region as well was just another woohoo moment.
That's the serendipity that brings a novel together, isn't it?
Yeah, and I had a few of those, because even where I set the start of it, I just saw a picture on Instagram and thought, oh yeah, that looks beautiful, castle on a hill, I'll choose that. And it turned out to be exactly the right place where the Grimms had, spent time at university and were collecting their stories. So it was like perfect to bring that part into the story as well.
Well, that's too good to be true. We had a question from Wendy. Any scenes hard to write?
Yeah.
Or possibly could be phrased, which scenes were hard to write? Because there's got to be some.
Yeah. It's probably more which scenes are hard to rewrite, because it's in the editing that you often you have to chop stuff out, or so I don't feel I had any traumatic, where I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to write this really traumatic scene. That would be hard from that point of view. But I think just the hardness of, how to write the scene so that it works. There were probably many, many, many of those. Yeah, so there was a bit of trimming down. It did take me a while to get it all together and to feed all of these threads in. There was really one scene that was really fun to write though, and that was the confrontation with the Brothers Grimm and my two characters. So that was probably the funnest one to write.
That the old history student in you just doing backflips?
Yeah. Yeah.
Being your third novel in, has it gotten any easier or has it gotten harder?
I don't know, actually. It's probably each one is different, and it's a challenge for each one, and you can't really say. I guess I'm learning more as I go. I must be, but yeah, I probably just find myself new problems to deal with. So it always seems to be, a real struggle to get the structural edit right or whatever, because I have kind of just, written all sorts of things that could be in it, but now it needs to be a better story. So yeah, but I do like challenging myself and trying different structures and trying different ways of writing. So I think that keeps me interested as well.
It's like we were saying about history, it doesn't get better, it doesn't always get worse, but it keeps going. And it's the same thing with books. You go to a new one and it's no harder, it's can be as hard. It's its own creation. But everything that I read in this book needed to be there and was fantastic. We've only got a few minutes left, so I might start wrapping up, everybody. And thank you, Steph, for coming by tonight. It's so good to. Is this our first Australian event?
Yes.
I feel like. So it's great to have the book, obviously, at Eltham Bookshop for everybody who lives out in the eastern suburbs. Even if you don't live in the eastern suburbs, you can drive there. And thanks everyone for coming along. We'll be eagerly hand selling the book over the coming months, and want to congratulate Alan and Unwin for this wonderful publication. Gabby as well for all of your work. Thanks everybody for your support on behalf of the bookshop and on behalf of Steph. We're open at the bookshop 7 days a week and late night shopping on Thursdays. So please see us for your Freedom of Birds, and while you're at it, the other two of Steph's novels, and all other Christmas gifts.
And yours too, Robert.
Oh yeah, and I have a historical fiction book as well in the bookshop, as does Lauren Chater, who's in the audience. So there's a lot of fine novels to pick up from Elephant Bookshop. So please see us there. Steph, thanks once again so much. I hope the Fingers Crossed tour goes well.
Yes, thank you. And it's been lovely to see everybody. Thank you.
The Fingers Crossed tour is still called that, isn't it?
Yes, yes. We're sort of changing. My books haven't actually arrived in the stores here, so it's very fingers crossed as I drive down tomorrow to see if we can find any in the stores and get to the events that I've got planned. So
yeah.
More fingers crossed than
we can send you lots of them. We can send you down from
Vera, thank you.
We've got 9 boxes to unpack today.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Yeah, they might deliver quickly by tall ship the way that things are going at the moment.
Yeah, that's right.
Hopefully it makes them a rare commodity, and people love to get their hands on rare commodities. So if we'll look for the silver lining. I hope that everybody has a productive rest of the week, a wonderful and safe rest of the week. Steph, we do wish you all the best for the rest of the tour. Yeah, we look forward to seeing all the great reviews that will come through for this book. Thank you, Steph. Thank you, everybody. And I hope you have a lovely rest of the evening. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.